Psychonauts is a game I wish I grew up with. Not that I was lacking in childhood games or anything, but damn it, I wish I played Psychonauts as a kid. It's a game about traveling into the minds of characters and experiencing their thoughts, feelings, struggles, memories, and personalities as playable levels, which is just insanely cool. Like, that's probably one of the coolest concepts for a video game I've ever heard of, being able to explore people's minds. And I just know that if I had gotten it as a gift back then instead of Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, or Stitch Experiment 626, or SH2 the video game, it would have probably been one of my favorite games ever. But alas, we never bought it, because we didn't know it existed. In fact, there weren't that many people who did buy it back then, or knew it existed. You see, Psychonauts is what you'd call a cult classic. It had a long development cycle rife with developer inexperience, a change in office, a publisher backing out in the middle of development, insane levels of crunch by the end, and an eventual release date far too late into the 6th console generation to have that much of a chance at recuperating the $11 million spent over the past 4 to 5 years. All of that just for the game to sell 400,000 copies. It was a commercial failure, but hey, the critics loved it, and so did just about every one of the 400,000 who did play it. So, naturally, it would see its best days many years after release thanks to a pretty good Steam port, an insanely successful Humble Bundle, and extensive word of mouth from what's quite possibly the most fervent cult following for any game ever, outside of Mother 2 and 3, which I'm gonna ignore for convenience because I'm not in the right mental state to be able to handle Mother 3. It's to the point where, much like the Mother games, Psychonauts isn't really a cult classic anymore. It's just a classic, full stop. And after having finally played the game myself way too late in my life, I can confirm that it is every bit as brilliant as people say. It is a wee bit on the shorter side, but for a game from 2005, Psychonauts manages to execute on its core concept with both style and substance. It's got this distinct art style to it that I haven't really seen in any other game of the time. Just the hub world alone is so whimsical and wild, making it super fun to just explore and absorb the vibes. And that's before we even get to the minds themselves, which are even crazier. There's this one mind that takes the form of a Broadway show which performs these plays based on the character's life to the audience of her inner critic. And you can change the sets, scripts, and mood lighting at any time and explore them. You've got another mind that's a board game, where you get to shrink down into the board and play the game from the thick of it. Alright, you can convince the individual pieces to join the army and then fight as pieces on a board. Then you've got whatever the hell the Milkman conspiracy is, which is just beyond description. Right, it's probably the most well-known part of the whole game. It plays with gravity in a way that predates Mario Galaxy by 2 whole years. Even the tutorial mines, the basic braining boot camp, the cube of controlled chaos, the dance party that's a front for a very dark and traumatic past. Beyond the spectacle of it all, the reason why these minds are so genius is that they encapsulate the characters themselves in such a thorough way. There are subtle aspects of every character that are either revealed or accentuated by the quirks of each mind. The kind of quirks that you'll only notice after playing the game a second or third time. There's even bits of foreshadowing, like the start of basic braining being a dentist's office, or the bits of meat that show up in what is ostensibly Raz's mind.
My name
starts with a D.
is Rasputin.
Raz is the main character of the game. This supposedly 10-year-old kid, I have a hard time believing he's 10 years old with how based he is. He's voiced by Richard Horvitz, the same guy who played Billy in The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. And he's just one of the many well-designed characters in the game. Characters that have all these little details to them that are just there waiting for you to discover them. And it's these fine details that help Psychonauts hold up very well to scrutiny. And yeah, the voice acting is pretty good, and so is the writing, with some borderline ethereal lines and deliveries that make for some really good out-of-context compilations on YouTube.
Welcome to my mind.
It's so empty.
Over time, my husband will desire me less sexually, but he will always enjoy my pies. Come with us.
Introducing, fresh from an astonishing victory at the Killings and Billings, Dragon!
Soon they'll be dragging your ass out of here. Hey, are you late? Did you hear that?
So if I'm not mistaken, you're not Dr. Roboto, you don't pay my salary, so kindly back away from my elevator and die. Thank you, sir.
Well, I guess we're all going to die.
My whole life is flashing before my eyes. My first memory is of my dog, Lady. Lady and I used to go for long walks. They would go odd. This one time we went on what we called the longest walk of all time. First we went to the street, and then we ate and then walked 2 miles, and then we just stood for a while, and we stopped, and then we had to go to the bathroom, and then we stopped over, and then walked out, and then we stopped over, and then we had to and then we crossed the line, and then we walked 2 miles, and then we went, and then we stopped, and then we walked 4 miles, and then we went, and then we stopped, and then we stopped and asked for directions. And then I bent down to tie my shoe. And then I gave Lady a bone.
You grabbed one of the squirrel's nuts.
I would never do that. I could never kill everyone.
I am the milkman. My milk is delicious. Special delivery today.
And the sea shall run white with his rage.
This game is so genius that it makes me want to become a Psychonaut myself so that I can delve into the developers' minds to figure out how the hell they came up with this shit. Psychonauts was the first project developed by Double Fine Productions, which was founded at the turn of the millennium by former LucasArts employee Tim Schafer, someone who has a knack for directing games with interesting stories and witty dialogue and unique art styles, and cult followings. Even prior to Double Fine, he directed a point-and-click adventure game called Grim Fandango, which despite getting universal praise, was a commercial failure that became a cult classic later on. As foretold, the story of Double Fine is rife with commercial failure after publisher woe after Jack Black feature after financial problem, as well as of talent and ambition and fan support and Jack Black features and perhaps most of all luck, right? By many accounts outside of the quality of the games, Double Fine should have went out of business many years ago. But it hasn't. Their next major game, Brutal Legend, is this heavy metal themed RTS adventure hybrid that features Jack Black as the main character, along with his Tenacious D bandmate Kyle Gass and other metal legends like Rob Halford and Lita Ford and even the late Lemmy and Ozzy Osbourne. But even their combined likeness couldn't save this game from being another commercial failure, this time selling even less than Psychonauts despite also being a pretty good game. Before it released though, the studio decided to preemptively start development on the sequel to the game, investing a lot of resources and money into the project, only for the game's publisher, EA, to cancel it upon the evident failure of the first game, which would have left the studio to bite the dust right then and there had it not been for a little impromptu sort of game jam the team decided to do, internally known as Amnesia Fortnite. Basically, in the middle of developing Brutal Legend, the team decided to just forget about the game for 2 weeks, hence the name, alright, it's a Fortnite, not the Fortnite, and during that time they'd split into 4 teams, each tasked with coming up with prototypes for games of their own, and it turned out to be a positive enough experience to where they decided to do it again near the end of development, coming up with 2 more prototypes, totaling 6. And they continued to do these Amnesia Fortnites throughout the years, all the while finishing some of these prototypes and releasing them officially on places like Xbox Live Arcade, rest in peace. And I guess due to how comparatively cheap and quick these games were to make, they actually turned a profit and kept the company afloat during this time without the need to lay anyone off. But while this kind of release cycle was good for survival and building a portfolio of games, it wasn't really what anyone wanted to do for the rest of time, alright? They wanted to make proper-sized games like Psychonauts and Brutal Legend. And I mean, we all know what this studio is capable of making, judging from what their very first game was. Which is probably why in 2012, Tim Schafer decided to run a little experiment, taking an at-the-time novel approach to raising funds that, if successful, could allow for this kind of game to exist in the future. In February 2012, Double Fine Productions began a Kickstarter campaign for a point-and-click adventure game, tentatively titled Double Fine Adventure, which would be Tim Schafer's first since Grim Fandango. Apparently, according to the man himself, Grim Fandango was such a failure that it caused the whole point-and-click adventure genre to die out in the eyes of publishers. So he never really got to make another one for the longest time, because he couldn't find anyone willing to publish one. And so they took a little practice shot at this newfangled crowdfunding thing as a publisher-free alternative, where fans who grew up with adventure games could fund this kind of thing. The game was meant to be very small, something quick and easy to produce and document, so the campaign's goal was initially set at $400,000. $300,000 for the game and $100,000 for a documentary that they'd be producing of the development process with the help of 2-player productions. Cause why not? It was the largest goal ever set on Kickstarter at the time, yet absolutely puny in terms of how expensive proper-sized games tend to be. Now, this could go one of two ways. The campaign could reach its goal and would get funded and the project could happen, or it would fall short and not get funding. That's how Kickstarter worked. You either reach your goal and get funded, or you don't and you don't. And nobody really knew how things would pan out, alright? This was back when crowdfunding was relatively new, when Kickstarter itself was just a few years old. Nobody really saw it as a legitimate way of raising funds for larger projects just yet, as it hasn't really been done before. And that's why I think if things have gone a little differently and this campaign had failed back in the day, we'd see a very different gaming landscape, and I'm not sure Double Fine would still be a part of it. But thankfully we don't have to wonder, as it was quite the opposite. The campaign finished a month later in March with a total of $3.3 million raised, far exceeding even the wildest of expectations and setting a record for the most successful Kickstarter campaign to date in the process. Which was quite a pleasant surprise for Tim Schafer and Double Fine, even if it meant the expectations for Double Fine Adventure would now be much greater than the team was ready to meet. The release date for what would eventually become Broken Age was set for October 2012, which would have been a 6-month development cycle or so. That was an unrealistic goal to meet, especially since this was not going to be a proper game. So they delayed it to 2013, only to delay it again to 2014 when it became clear that they couldn't release in 2013. At which point they ended up splitting the game in half, releasing the first act in January 2014 in early access for a little extra funding to complete the second act by the end of the year, only for them to delay it again, all the way until April 2015 when the second act finally released. Yeah, development took longer than expected, the scope expanded quite a bit, and the game went over budget, leaving some backers feeling a little bit weird about the whole thing. Personally, after watching the aforementioned documentary series on YouTube, I'd like to say it's more of an underestimation of scope rather than a deliberate misuse of funds, as it's clear that Tim Schafer really did try to budget things out and be realistic about scheduling from the beginning, but as production began and the details were ironed out, issues just kept cropping up and things got hairy. You can feel the initial excitement of starting a new project make way for everyone locking in as lessons had to be learned and decisions had to be made on what could be done within a reasonable budget. Because at the end of the day, the longer you take on a game, the more money it's gonna cost to make. Annual salaries, contractor fees, marketing, shipping, software licenses, rent, all sorts of things. And there were many times when this reality of game development clashed with Tim Schafer's ambitions, and you can see it wear down on him and the studio as time went on. But in the end, as far as Double Fine was concerned, it was a success, in the sense that just about broke even, was well received, and it proved the viability of crowdfunding.
Crowdfunding's here to stay. I think it's hopefully going to grow, and in my dream world, it would be big enough to fund AAA games.
So what's next?
Psychonauts 2.
It's an interesting decision to announce the development of Psychonauts 2 and start a crowdfunding campaign for it, given how many times they've tempted fate in the past decade or so, but clearly it's a decision Tim Schafer and crew have been wanting to make for years. They just had to wait for the right time, which just so happened to be later in 2015 during the Game Awards.
Then send in the Psychonauts.
And it seemed like they really thought things through this time. The crowdfund money would only be a third of the total development costs, with the rest being handled by Double Fine themselves along with other investors, which is something a little more diverse and safe than just relying on money from their fans or being at the complete whim of investors or publishers. And that's why it wasn't done through Kickstarter this time, but rather through Fig.co, a brand new video games focused crowdfunding site that also allowed people to straight up invest into the projects themselves, as opposed to just donating your money with no stake in the project. Fig is an interesting topic on its own, mostly because of the kinds of games and projects funded on it, namely a certain knowledge-based game that Rasputin absolutely loves to death. But all you need to know is that it was where Psychonauts 2 would get its funding. And while people were a little suspicious of them using this new platform that was founded by a former Double Fine executive, that didn't stop them from helping to raise $3.8 million over a $3.3 million goal, making it another success. And they used that success as a proof of viability when they started reaching out to publishers again, right? They had this planned out with much more confidence than ever before. Psychonauts 2 was going to happen, and it will come out at the end of 2018, as promised, and it will be everything fans have been waiting for. Except it didn't come out in 2018. In 2017, they released a VR title called Psychonauts and the Rhombus of Ruin, which takes place in between the mainline games. Right, this isn't Psychonauts 2, it's just a spinoff. I don't have a VR headset, so I couldn't tell you if it's good or not, but consensus seems to be that it's just fine, if not inconsequential. You don't need to play it before playing Psychonauts 2. In fact, they pretty much explained the plot of that game at the start of Psychonauts 2 anyways. But also in 2017, Starbreeze Studios, the Payday guys, had invested into Psychonauts 2 as the publisher in the equation, willing to distribute the game as long as they could recuperate the investment from the sales. Then at the end of 2017, the game got delayed to 2019. Then at the end of 2018 and through early 2019, Starbreeze would find itself in hot water for things like insider trading and a whole bunch of other shit that kinda left Psychonauts 2's funding in question for a bit. At least until Microsoft swooped in and acquired Double Fine, buying the publishing rights from Starbreeze and even paying off all the other investors from Fig as well. Which, okay, I just have to stop for a second and highlight how insane this is. That Microsoft, of all companies, has swooped in here, considering that they were the publisher who dropped the original Psychonauts back in 2004, forcing Double Fine to scramble to find a new one in Majesco, who ended up exiting video games publishing in part due to the failure of Psychonauts. So, to have them come back 15 years later and put this much faith into the sequel to that game, that doesn't just happen. I mean, yeah, Microsoft was a different company at this point and was going through a now infamous acquisition streak with the Xbox Game Studios branding, but still, this might just be the biggest bone yet that has ever been thrown Double Fine's way, given their bone-rich history. Even better was that Microsoft were supposedly allowing them all the time in the world to make Psychonauts 2 the best possible game it could be, so that they could ensure that it lived up to the standards of the original. Again, something that doesn't ever happen anymore, not in this economy at least. Now, judging from all the delays, it's clear that the development process for this game has been quite troubled and arduous. And this was made especially clear by Psychonauts, the documentary series produced of the process. Yes, they made another one, same production team too, and this time I actually watched it because it's about the game I'm talking about. Now you know why this video took so long. Double Fine doesn't really function like most studios where people have specialized roles with distinct disciplines and hierarchies and pipelines and all that. Instead, the developers are a little more generalized and collaborative, and they rely on communication and open sharing of ideas to stay organized. It allows for creativity to flow freely and for a space to exist where people feel comfortable expressing whatever's on their mind. And there were times when some of the new managers who were brought on for Psychonauts 2, who are used to working with traditional studios, struggled trying to manage Double Fine without inadvertently hurting their ability to create and work together. And you can just feel the studio as a whole struggle under this more traditional style of management, how people started feeling dismissed and getting defensive and overall feeling like they couldn't really express their opinions. And you can see the managers themselves struggle to adapt their managerial styles to this new beast of a studio. There wasn't any animosity or infighting or anything, alright? Everyone remained professional and things were done to address these issues, but the frustration was there. Through all the delays, staff departures, uncertainty surrounding Starbreeze, uncertainty surrounding Microsoft and no longer being an independent studio, that global pandemic thing that happened in 2020, and the pressure of trying to follow up a game as beloved as Psychonauts, and you have quite possibly the most challenging development cycle the studio ever went through. Even after many of the new managers left and the team put itself together the way it functions best, there was still the daunting task of making a sequel to Psychonauts. I want to reiterate that I didn't grow up with Psychonauts, and that nostalgia has no part in how I feel about the game. I didn't even know it existed until 2015 when I stumbled upon WatchMojo's top 10 overlooked games of all time list, where they put Psychonauts at number 1. Then I stumbled upon WatchMojo's hilariously outdated top 10 3D platformers of all time list, where they put it at number 6. But even though it seemed cool back then the way it was described, I ended up forgetting about it because, well, one, WatchMojo was forgettable, and I had other games I wanted to play instead. So I just kind of moved on with my life, telling myself that someday I would play it, I guess.
Dogen sends his best.
And that day didn't come until 2022 when I decided that I guess I would play it in preparation of playing the sequel. And I really liked it. I liked the writing, the comedy, the level design, the art, the vibes, the characters, the ideas. It was a lot of fun and it stuck with me ever since, but I wouldn't exactly say it was a masterpiece. Maybe by stretch of imagination, but not in actuality. There are many ways in which the original Psychonauts still holds up, like the art style, most of the voice acting, all the good stuff everyone says about it. But there are several key aspects where, yeah, you can tell it was a studio debut and that it came out all the way back in 2005. I can write some of it off as charming, like the slightly stilted animations, the levitation power being OP in the best way, the UI being huge and blurry even when playing in 1440p on PC, not to mention that when you're in full screen the frame rate is limited to 75 FPS, and I have to play windowed to get to 120 I'm not spoiled by, which is doable but it's still kind of awkward. The kind of shit that just comes with older video games that many people say is just part of the experience. But then there are the not so charming aspects of the game, like the lackluster combat, the overall length being kinda short, half the mines being tutorial levels, the jumps feeling quite floaty and not having that hold the button to jump higher thing that Super Mario 64 had already done 9 whole years prior. Or the asylum part of the game where you fix the minds of the patients, which isn't exactly realistic to how people deal with mental illness. Especially the milkman conspiracy that everyone seems to love, where you make things worse for the guy instead of fixing it, just so he opens the gate. Or the fact that trying to 100% the game by collecting all 1,537 figments is an absolute test in patience and eyesight that single-handedly made it less fun than it would have otherwise been. Don't get me wrong, at its core I still consider Psychonauts 1 to be a solid 9 out of 10 experience, so long as you don't try to 100% it. It's just, for me personally, this is not a top 10 3D platformer of all time. Psychonauts 2, on the other hand, absolutely is. The best way I can put Psychonauts 2 is that it's the best possible version of the original game's premise. It has managed to take what was so good about the first game and expand upon it so much that it just blows my mind on so many levels. Every single level and bit of the world here is brilliant. From the very get-go, the mines, the mother lobe, the questionable area, which is easily one of my favorite locales in any game ever by the way, it's all brimming with style and secrets and little details that really bring out the personality of the game and whatever locale or mine it is you're playing. It's pretty much all the same voice actors reprising the old roles. Richard Horvitz, Nicky Rapp, Steven Stanton, Alexis Leeson, I don't know how to pronounce that, David K, Nick Jamison, all those guys. While also bringing on some new actors, including those who worked on older Double Fine games like Jack Black and Elijah Wood. Kimberly Brooks, in particular, the voice of Hollis Forsythe, did an incredible job portraying her and even won an award for her performance. Not to mention the designs for all these new characters, such as Hollis Forsythe, managed to keep up with the wacky sort of style of the original characters. I mean, just look at Forsythe. This is an insane design that just fits her personality like a glove. Same with the Psychic 6, same with the interns, honestly. I know not everyone is 100% crazy about the interns, but to me, they play their part in making Raz feel out of place for once, and not in a way he can just nerd his way out of. And yeah, the story is just as well written as before, only now it's paced better and it lasts substantially longer and it explores many of the characters in a deeper manner than ever before. It answers a lot of the questions left behind by the original and ties things together so well that it legitimately left me speechless at points. Especially what they did with Ford Cruller. He is easily the star of the show in terms of unraveling the plot and challenging everything you know about the in-game universe and Raz's place in it. You get to actually explore his fractured mind and experience his alternate identities as you help him put himself together. And just the mines, like how? How was this made in Unreal Engine 4? I've been running through these portals and setting the camera all around trying to find seams somewhere so I can figure out how they did it. These mines are just straight up non-Euclidean. You get this one mine that starts off as this controlled office environment to try and fool Dr. Lobato into giving up his quote-unquote employer, only for Lobato to catch on, and it just unravels into this sort of mouth horror thing because Dr. Lobato is supposed to be a dentist. And that's just the first mine. Each subsequent mine just kicks up the ante again and again. like Ford's fractured mind being 3 separate mini-minds based on his outs, or the psychedelic yellow submarine type environments of Helmut Fulber's mind, or the hospital-themed mind of Hollis Forsythe, who she used to be a hospital worker, and when Raz messes around too much with it, it starts to corrupt into a sort of casino. Or the mind of Cassiopeia, who is an author, where everything is themed after books, and the water is ink and all that. Or Compton Bull's mind, which is a cooking show that was inspired by one of the Amnesia Fortnite prototypes. Every single mind in this game is brilliant. Conceptually, visually, in execution, they're brilliant. Psychonauts was always brilliant and cool and all, but Psychonauts 2 does all that while also being tightly designed and modernized and also filled with personality at the same time. In one moment, it's a rush of color and creativity with all these ideas just coming together in such a spectacular manner, and in other moments, it's an emotional, moving story about coming to terms with one's past mistakes. All of the characters in this game are changed significantly by the end of it, and by the end, I was changed by the game in a way not many games have done. And in other moments, it's just an absolute riot, just like the original, so if that's why you like the original, then you'll be happy here too.
Where'd you get the milk? From the goats?
Oh, yeah, that would have been easier. Hey, it brought us closer, Fran.
There are so many things that it does right that I can barely put it together in a cohesive manner without making this video drag on forever. Which is why I'm kinda scared to admit that I have no real complaints or critiques. I have nothing bad to say. There is no other shoe. This game might just be the closest to perfect that a 3D platformer can ever get. I will say I prefer the vibes of the first game, as well as the general writing and comedy and sometimes the voice acting, and Psychonauts 2 does get kinda hand-holdy at points, especially with how Raz has this incessant need to point out that he hears emotional baggage nearby, even when I can clearly see it.
What's that sound?
I don't know, Raz, what is that sound? You tell me. But besides that, it's mostly just matters of preference, or in many cases objective improvements over Psychonauts 1, like the controls. While they do miss much of the momentum the original had, they feel much snappier and have a larger moveset that allows for greater variety in movement. Levitation is now balanced, even if I kinda miss how OP it was. The hold, jump, to jump higher mechanic is present. The tutorial section doesn't take up half the game this time. Trying to 100% the game by collecting all the figments isn't nearly as frustrating because there are less of them and you can get tools that can actually help you find them. It even addresses the asylum problem with how Raz fixed the patients by dedicating an entire mind to what could go wrong when you try and change someone's mind. And it serves as a learning opportunity for Raz to take care when exploring minds, as well as for the developers to take care when exploring topics like mental health.
We definitely dealt with some heavy topics in the first game. I think we're just a little bit more older and have more empathy towards the human condition, so we want to make sure we kind of lucked out a little bit with the first game, that we didn't just blunder into some incredibly insensitive stuff.
You can see the 20 years of experience the team now has in just about every aspect of Psychonauts 2, compared to the relative inexperience they had while working on the original Psychonauts. And that's no shade against the original Psychonauts. You can still play the original game and enjoy it just as much as before. If anything, Psychonauts 2 enhances and validates the original by effectively being a perfect sequel. It's the ultimate love letter to Psychonauts and its fans, and I have no problems calling it a masterpiece. When I say that Psychonauts 2 shouldn't exist, I don't mean it in the sense that it doesn't deserve to exist, or that it should never have been made, or that we'd be better off without it. Quite the opposite, if you couldn't guess. And I know you probably feel jebaited, like I tricked you into thinking I was gonna hate on the game, or maybe you're relieved I didn't go down the contrarian route. Either way, I just don't know how else to put it. This game shouldn't exist. Like, I know why it does, and I agree, but how? These kinds of AA games just don't get made anymore. You either get small indie projects or gargantuan AAA live services, and publishers don't really allow for these kinds of risky, less than massive games with moderate budgets anymore. And it's a shame because we need games like this. And Psychonauts 2 is proof that gamers want games like this, not just in the critical reception and award nominations, but in the sales figures too. This game ended up selling over 1.7 million copies in less than a year, a figure that took the original nearly 10 years to even come close to. And above all, it just goes to show how talented and resilient Double Fine is to be able to produce something like this in spite of everything that has happened. And how if any of these dominoes hadn't fallen when they did, had they never done those Amnesia Fortnites, or the Broken Age campaign wasn't a success, or had they not been bought by Microsoft just in time for the pandemic, they probably won't be around right now, and we would never be able to play this masterpiece. By many accounts, Psychonauts 2 shouldn't exist, and yet it does, and I'm so glad it does.